Hello, everybody. Welcome to Reddit Roast 50. A bit of a milestone today. So, we've got all three of us, Mal, John, and I, all here to roast your Reddit profiles. John, Mal, great to see you both.
Great
Nice
to
to see
see you,
you
Sam.
again, Sam.
So, for today's session, we've got four or five different profiles. We've got four profiles on a bonus, which is nice. We're going to go through a bit of a range of profiles from everybody from there's a Frenchie here who wants to go into investment banking, which is exactly the role I used to do. We've got somebody who wants to go into consumer goods, which is very closely linked to what John was doing. So it's going to be a really interesting roast today. For those who haven't watched before, Mal and John, would you like to briefly introduce yourselves?
Yes. Hi, I'm Mal. I'm the resident editor and chief content creator over at SWC.
In my past life, I was myself an MBA student, went to Haas, was an admissions reader and admissions interviewer. After graduating, I worked in CPG brand management, first as an operator and then in the company's corporate venture practice.
Interesting. So some really close connections to some of the profiles we're going to roast today. Right, let's get stuck in. Mal, who have we got?
So today, our first profile is advice on next steps before applying to the MBA in the future. So this is someone who's going to apply 3 to 5 years later. I'm graduating this June from a semi-target UK university where I studied maths and econ. My predicted final grade is a low 2:1, which is around a 61% or a 3.4 GPA roughly. I sadly had a pretty rough second year due to the passing of my father, and I barely passed my modules. Last month, I took the GRE, 332 score. Career options. So OP has a few offers already. It is currently accepted the offer at a middle market bank in FX rates trading, Scandinavian markets focus. Also, an offer from a T2 consulting firm in the financial advisory graduate scheme, a return offer for quantitative trading at a mid-sized hedge fund where I interned last summer. And previously, OP has completed internships at EY Parthenon, working in M&A advisory oil and gas, and in a $30 billion AUM asset manager, where I worked in private credit. So OP has a bit to say about that. I'll be honest that I'm not completely satisfied with how recruiting turned out. My original goal was investment banking, particularly in oil and gas. But this year, recruiting was extremely competitive, and I wasn't able to convert the opportunities I had. Because of that, I'm now thinking more seriously about an MBA, ideally aiming for M7s. HSW is the dream, but OP thinks that he doesn't have much of a competitive profile. I'm from a small Caribbean island and had all of my university years fully funded via diversity scholarships, and I've been very avidly involved in charities, and I'm a co-founder of a charity mentoring youth from unrepresented backgrounds and assisting with tutoring for GCSEs. Some questions. I will ask those later. What do you guys think?
Good
Yeah,
stuff. Over to you, John. What do you reckon?
I like this profile overall. It's not often we get to see such an interesting mix of things. Academically, I think there's concern around OP's GPA. I think European schools are more sensitive to those grades, but for the US, when they have to convert, it often doesn't count towards ranking submissions. So forgivable with his 332, and that explanation is totally valid. OP, sorry for your loss. Demographics, I mean, the Caribbean, not many people apply from there. European school, Caribbean origin, not sure if that's where OP is located. But that's still a plus for diversity in a Scandinavian bank. That makes for lots of interesting perspectives to talk about, both in the application as well as the essays. I love the ECs that OP is involved with. Professionally, I mean, the mix of brand names on there, congratulations on landing the role with the middle market bank. Um, in the next 3 to 5 years, when you're applying to business school, that would be, a time to really showcase leadership. And then goals wise, I would say IB makes sense. I would like to see something a little bit more specialized that ties back and tethers back to your background and your interests. MBB could work if it's a bit more of a DD focused role. And I would want to make a case for why OP would want to work in the US if OP were applying to US schools, which looks like he is.
Hmm.
Overall, Great profile. Best of luck in your journey. Over to you, Sam.
Yeah, I basically agree with everything you said there. I think the key thing for me is, well, one factor is going to be timing. And I think, Mal, this is one of his first questions, right?
Yeah. It's how many years of work experience should OP aim for?
Yeah, I think it's a big factor. OP is, as far as I can see, is graduating in June, so is yeah, three kind of 4 or 5 years away from the MBA itself. I basically see two options. I see a deferred MBA application, get on with it. For that, you would be aiming for the April deadlines next year, and that's basically a free bite at the apple. There's no downside to doing that. If not, your next option is to apply in about 3 years' time. So, to answer the question specifically, if you've already got the GRE and it's expiring in the next, say, let's say 5 years from now, and programs expect a minimum of 2 years of work experience, for me, the sweet spot is about 3 to 4. That's where
Mm-hmm.
I think OP should be focusing
Hmm.
on the application. In other words, you've got a deferred application next year and a normal kind of regular MBA application in what would be about 4 years' time from now. I think as long as OP nails that timeline, I think the profile that, as John's just laid out, is really, really nice. The other thing I would jump in and say is that these target schools. So I'm thinking about the next 5 years. Lastly, should I consider EU programs such as Imperial,
Mm.
LBS, and INSEAD? And I think this is the nice time to talk about this because OP is asking, do I have a chance at HSW? Should I be thinking more realistically? And should I be including the European schools in my kind of in my
Mm.
thoughts? Um, the As far as I'm aware, the US schools are the ones that have these deferred MBA processes because the European programs tend to have masters in management, which is targeting the same group of people but a different. That's to do a master's immediately after graduation, as opposed to doing an MBA in 3 or 4 years' time. So I think that right now your best bet is a deferred application to the top US programs. As I say, free bite of the apple. If it works, great. If it doesn't work out, you haven't lost anything. That's not going to be held against you in 3 years' time for a full-time application. And I think in terms of the chances there, John, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but I think with a well built application, OP should probably be targeting the M7s, don't you think?
That's a reasonable assumption. I think that GRE score is strong.
Mm.
Obviously, the GPA is not ideal, but OP has a valid explanation for that, and uh, whatever role OP is going into is going to be very quant heavy, and that will garner a lot of respect. I think if OP is able to accumulate these leadership experiences, these crown jewels, then I think M7 inclusive of HSW is fair game.
Okay. So let's build out on what John said there about the leadership experience. Like, what are some typical leadership experiences that someone who is, quite young in the work environment, let's be honest,
Hmm.
how can you, as somebody who's just coming into the company, gain leadership experience? Because you can't, for example, you're not going to be managing many people at this age.
Sure.
So I'll
Yeah.
start off. One idea is raising your hand to help manage interns. That's one thing you
Hmm.
can do. So if OP is, I think if I'm right, accepted the offer to the middle market bank doing FX rates trading, and that basically means going to be doing probably sitting on a trading floor, quite an exciting environment, probably involved in a rotation program if that bank has a rotation program of interns. One thing you could easily do is raise your hand to help manage that rotation program. What does that mean? You'd be involved in the interviewing process to help interview interns. It would mean you'd be involved in selecting which interns receive a return offer, which is super interesting, and you start building the kind of leadership skills required to manage people. So you can get leadership experience from a professional perspective, but you can
Hmm.
also get leadership experience outside of the office, which could be
Hmm.
interesting. John, can you give a couple of examples of how somebody can get leadership experience outside of the office?
Yeah, just to build on one point there is an opportunity to garner some leadership experience within the office through employee resource groups. So any kind of affinity groups, whether it's Asian American Alliance or, any kind of cultural groups, you can take the charge of organizing events. Um, and then outside of the office, there are opportunities, to join boards of organizations, no matter how big, no matter how small they are.
Mm.
You can be part of a sports league and be a captain there. There are many ways you can demonstrate leadership across different industries, whether it aligns with your goals or not. And I think with if you start that process early and not realize that 6 months before you apply to school, then that seems more credible than just stacking them up, and joining organizations right before you hit that apply button.
Yeah, I love that. I think building on that, it sounds like OP is already involved in some sort of diversity organizations. For example, he
Hmm.
received diversity scholarships for his undergrad. Why don't you put yourself forward to help manage, allocate, interview scholarship recipients for that
Hmm.
organization? I don't know off the top of my head I don't know which organizations these are, but imagine it was like a Forte, for example, right?
Hmm.
Forte gives out scholarships to women. You could easily, having received a scholarship from them, you could easily raise your hand to join Forte, to be a more active member of Forte and help them in their mission. And hey, presto, you've got leadership experience for your MBA application. Even if at a relatively young age you haven't got direct management experience in the office, you can build that leadership experience. And OP has time, as you say. OP's got 4 years really to start building that up, and that will look authentic because when it comes time to apply to MBAs, it won't be last minute.
Hmm.
Yeah, I
What do
like
you
it.
think about that co-founder experience of charity mentoring youth from underrepresented
Um,
backgrounds?
yeah, I like that as
Just
well.
distinguish.
That is obviously that could obviously be founded as good leadership experience, framed as good leadership experience. I don't know if that is still ongoing. I have seen people do this ahead of undergrad applications, and then this stuff gets closed down at undergrad stage. But if it's still ongoing, then yeah, absolutely a great thing to build out from both a leadership perspective and an extracurricular perspective. Yeah, John, thoughts?
Yeah, I think that can go both ways, both professional and ECs. I think that's a great add to the profile.
Guys, I think I'm talking myself into this profile. I think I like it more than I did at the start. There's certainly a lot of opportunities here to build on. It's really, really nice. One thing I'm going to touch on as a former investment banker, I'd like to talk about this investment banking goal and whether that is realistic along the path that OP is talking about. In other words, working at a middle market bank doing FX rates trading, Scandinavian markets focus. I'm not sure if that's a Scandinavian bank or I'm not slightly, I can't guess what bank that is. But anyway, if that is what OP is going to do for the next few years, my personal preference for a post MBA goal in the net, as far as the narrative goes, writing the essays saying, after the MBA, I want to do this. I think OP should really focus on investment banking. It sounds first like that's genuinely where OP is interested because that was the original goal, back in the day. It is also where OP is going to have the most experience. I don't
Hmm.
think as an FX rates trader, you're going to be of much value to a MBB consultancy, right?
Yeah.
I didn't do FX rates trading, but I sat on the trading floor like a couple of desks down from the rates traders. And like that is a difficult job, but it's not strategy consulting.
Hmm.
And so I think OP should align his narrative. I think it's a his. We don't actually know for sure if it's he or her. Anyway, I think they should align their narrative with investment banking purely. And I
Hmm.
think building on that, a really nice approach to this narrative could be while working on the FX rates trading desk, focused on, I don't know, Norwegian, Swedish government. Um, I guess it's probably krona they're trading. I've discovered this challenge, this thing, this interesting angle. And that's what I want to focus on tackling after the MBA. And I want to do it at a bigger, more established, probably bulge bracket bank. And I'm going to go in after the MBA via the rotation program, and you can kind of lay out what that plan looks like. I think that's a much more credible goal than saying MBB consulting and
Hmm.
throwing yourself in a really, really competitive bucket of consultants.
Hmm.
Mm, okay.
Am I on the
I
right
think
track?
yes, I think we've
Yeah.
answered all of Poppy's questions.
Good
Yeah,
stuff.
that's all of your questions.
Okay.
Should we move on to our next profile?
I would just say, OP, if you do decide to apply to deferred MBA application programs with the April deadlines, we're currently working with clients on those for this year. Alternatively, next year, come like January, February, you want to get in touch to do those deferred applications, we can help you with that. Cool, Mal, let's do it. Next profile.
Next profile. All right. Profile review. Looking for some feedback. 30 male, East Asian, born in the US. From a T10 US public university, T50 overall, has a GPA of 3.1 in a STEM degree, with a 665 GMAT, targeting 700 plus, but tempted to settle with this 665, scored higher in mocks. 8 years of work experience, entry-level roles at a Fortune 500 R&D company, named co-inventor of a flagship product with a global launch, patent pending, freelance STEM tutoring for 8 years as well. Strong recommendation letter from the director. Application target is round one or round two in 2027. Post MBA goals, healthcare sector strategy consulting. Target schools, M7, especially Wharton, Kellogg, Sloan, and GSB, and T15, especially Hastuck, Fuqua, Ross, and Dartmouth. What do you guys think?
John, how's the
I
profile?
Let's start with those academics. Look, I mean that 3.1 is gives me a few, some palpitations. I would like to see, a good explanation for that. A Q82 is fine, but a 665 is not. Uh, alongside that GPA and the fact that OP is an ORM first generation. Oh well, ORM East Asian American. We don't know if OP is first gen or grew up in a city without much, without much diversity around them. But I think that's still going to be a concern. So the academics concern me. Um, Extracurriculars, I see STEM tutoring, that's fine. I would like to have seen a little bit more growth or impact or evidence that he was able to scale this to a certain point after 8 years of doing tutoring. Professionally, I think I completely respect that role. I've worked with people who worked in R&D and who have done QC and QA roles. Not much of them applying to business school. Um, Very cool to learn that he's also the co-inventor of a product. I wonder if that product is within the company or outside the company. Might be within, but still, super cool path to talk about there. Um, Goals makes me a little bit nervous. I would say going from QA and R&D into consulting um, is a little bit of a stretch. Not saying that OP shouldn't apply to that when he's in business school, but when applying to business school, I would probably stick with the same industry, maybe pivot into a PM role or an equivalent sort of brand manager or product manager role. Overall, I would like to see a little bit more leadership. I think given OP's role, he probably has had experience working cross-functionally, so I would bring that out in the profile, as well as any kind of strategy toolkit he's leaned on. But for the most part, that GPA, my mind is on that GPA, folks. So over to you, Sam.
Yeah. Let's dig into that GPA a little bit more. You said that it needs an explanation. How would you give an explanation to that? Where would you write that and what would it look like?
The optional information section, the additional info section in most schools range from 200 words to 500 words. So use that space to talk about any kind of reasonable um, you know, reasons for why that GPA tanked. It may have been, a couple bad classes. It may have been a bad semester when there were personal issues going on. It may have been something else. If that explanation is valid, that can help, um, explain for why that GPA is not reflective of OP's academic abilities. Um, but yeah,
What
I
are
think I
good
want
reasons and what are bad reasons?
good reasons. I was sick for a while.
Yeah, missed some classes,
I
couldn't sit
missed
an exam.
classes, couldn't sit for the exam, personal reasons, maybe like family member was sick or something else happened.
Mm.
Um,
And had to care for them, which took out of my
and yeah, correct, and had to care for them, or maybe had to work during maybe
Mm.
finances changed when you were in school and you had to work to afford tuition, and so you're sort of dividing your time between uh paying for your tuition and actually being the recipient of that tuition.
Mhm.
Um, those are some common reasons that I've seen. And then, some of the poor reasons can be, I partied too hard. And I decided that that classes I didn't want to take classes seriously. In which case, there are ways to reposition that a little bit more. Other reasons can be,
Another one, actually, just to jump in, is a lot of people applying for MBAs now studied during COVID.
oh
And
yeah.
that kind of thrown up all kinds of reasons for
Hmm.
GPA being affected.
Hmm.
I had one client a while ago who was in quarantine for loads of their undergrad because they got COVID and they got locked down and they
Mm,
couldn't study. And of course, that has a huge impact on your grades. And that is a pretty good mitigating circumstance, a pretty good optional essay to write. Like, I tried really hard during undergrad, but I didn't have my laptop during quarantine because I got locked in a hotel at
sure.
the airport in some random country. Like, that is
Yeah.
that is a good explanation as well, I think.
Yeah, it has to be quarantine. It has to be COVID plus, right? Because then you're also applying alongside people who have gone through the same thing,
Sure.
right? So maybe I had to go home, big time change. Didn't have the resources with me, and the classes at that point were already hybrid, and so I wasn't able to see, the lab being carried out in person. So I missed. I couldn't understand the concepts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the COVID could be another factor as well. Okay, so that's on the GPA and how to explain it. It is a STEM subject, so hopefully that counts for a little bit as well, but still totally aligned. Is a 665, John, enough to offset a 3.1 GPA? And do you think they should settle?
It is not, especially for OP's demographic, and OP should not settle. I would
Yeah.
say in order to make up for that 3-1, even for a lower M7 school or T15 school, you need to get it up to at least a 695, if not higher.
Yeah. It's I was thinking about this in terms of trying to put some numbers on it. So a six, we don't have that much data around Focus Edition because it's fairly new. But historically, we know that the average for the M7 is about 730, which
Yeah,
converts to about a
685.
685 or thereabouts.
Sure.
Right. So OP's 20 points below the GMAT average for the M7. And by the way, I think like Yale is up there and NYU Stern has a high average as well. So yeah, 20 points below where it needs to be. And is East Asian born US, which tends to be one of the highest scoring groups. So those two together is, I think, yeah, I agree, a bit of a cause for concern. So OP, don't settle. I know you were hoping we would say, yeah, you're okay with that. You don't need to go and do the GMAT again. Go and focus on your extracurriculars. Nope. Get back to the books and get on with it. Um,
So okay, so my next question then for you would be, what do you did touch upon the schools a little bit. What do you think about his chances at all of those schools?
John?
I would say Wharton, GSB, and potentially Sloan are going to be tough. I would say M7 is possible. I would say the more realistic target at this point would be T15s.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm aligned on that. I would cross off, honestly, I'd cross off HSW, right? Just
Hmm.
cross those off. You're below, you've got a 3.1 GPA, you're below average on almost every kind of
Hmm.
quantifiable metric for Wharton and
Hmm.
GSB and Harvard. Cross those off. I think bottom end of the M7 is your reach area. So that's the Kellogg's, the Chicago Booth could put in there as well. Those are your reach schools, I think, with this profile. And then Haas, Tuck, Fuqua, Ross, Darden, play the numbers game because
Hmm.
all of those have competitive GMATs. But if you play the numbers game and you get enough, um, you put enough applications in, maybe you strike lucky on one of them that really likes, for example, your patent, which is quite unique about this
Hmm.
profile.
Hmm.
And you're lucky and boom, you're there. But that will need, as John said, a good narrative. I'm not convinced healthcare sector strategy is particularly like your jam. Maybe I'm wrong, but it doesn't seem like it. I think with the right narrative, maybe the T15, T10, and bottom of the M7, I think is where OP should be focused.
Can you expand more on that narrative and what do you think OP can do to improve his profile?
Yeah, well, let's talk about the narrative specifically. I'll just kick this off. John, if you have any thoughts, love to hear them. But I'm imagining something like if you're going to go to healthcare, right? Healthcare applications tend to have a very strong why healthcare. Yeah, very strong, like my my father died of a preventable illness, and we were battling with the insurance company for ages. And my mission is to transform this very specific niche area within healthcare that is achievable. But to do that, I need an MBA and a bit of consulting experience in the healthcare sector first. And it's a very, like, you've got a very strong North Star
Yeah.
for that healthcare story to work. I don't see that right now. Now maybe it's there, but it's not mentioned in this short profile evaluation. But I suspect it's not. So that's what a healthcare narrative would typically look like. In this case, I'm imagining focusing on OP's biggest unique factor, which is probably the flagship product and patent, discovering something during that process. I enjoy this particular subsector. I really want to work in this particular role that I've discovered during this unique experience. And that's why my short-term goal is probably, yeah, as John said, something like a PM role within this sector that OP is already in. And maybe later OP wants to move into a tangential sort of long-term area, for example, a regulator, a policymaker that's defining this particular sector, an entrepreneurial venture long term that really builds on this R&D experience. And I want to launch, like I want to focus on developing a cool, like niche subset of products for this particular industry. That could be an interesting long-term goal as well, but a lot more aligned with what OP is already doing. And obviously you can link that to why you need an MBA in terms of like marketing classes and um, I think any exposure to like legal frameworks, fundraising could also link into that. So there's loads of reasons why you need an MBA for that narrative as well. What have I missed?
Yeah.
John, any thoughts to build on that?
No, I think that's great. I think lean into the detail orientation and the stakes involved in his role, right? Because even a QA and a QC role, there are stories like, I discovered this small cog in this machine that, if it went ahead, it would have cost lives or it would have led to something. And, link it to healthcare. It's what you said, Sam, plus reminding the audience that, that OP's headed on in the air. He's not thinking in broad strategy things, but rather I've lived and breathed the entire process from start to finish. Um, I am now well positioned to be able to lead it.
Yeah, I think the difference between what OP's been doing and what OP should be aiming to do after the MBA is introducing a bit of a leadership element. I'm
Mhm.
understanding from this that OP, like I'm imagining like a researcher buried in a lab, like on his or
Hmm.
her own, working on some like gadget somewhere, transitioning from that stereotype to the overseer of the research process, the overseer of the product development process, who's managing resources, managing budgets, organizing teams, which is using MBA skills. One way or another, that's the transition that I think should be made.
Hmm. Hmm.
Mm, okay.
Cool.
All right. And what else do you think can OP do besides work on the narrative?
I've got one idea. Currently, there's one LOR mentioned, strong rec letter from director. John, who could the other LOR be from?
Someone who's able to speak to OP's leadership abilities, his abilities to work with people, work with others, convince others, a different side of OP that isn't just, OP does his job and does it well.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
that could be, a skiff level manager. It could be a manager who OP worked with for a side initiative, a side quest, a side project, employee resource group, could be outside the company. Could be the person who helped get OP's name on that patent. I mean, there's whatever
mm.
can bring nuance to and showcase OP's people and leadership skills that I'm supportive of.
Sounds like OP's has got a bit of a sort of journey there. I would also add former manager could work well. So if your
Yep.
manager from the R&D department is one, maybe the quality control manager is another. and they both
Sure.
sort of show different sides of your professional journey, that could work nicely.
Mhm. Okay.
Other things that you could do to strengthen your profile. I wonder if this, and I think, John, you touched on this briefly in your walkthrough, the STEM tutoring. Like, there's,
Hmm.
in terms of, for me, in terms of helping a client put together an MBA application, there's a chasm between, like, I casually helped one or two people to, study math, right?
Hmm.
After class, like, we just hung out and had coffee and I helped them, versus I set up a tutoring company, LLC, tax registered, charging clients with a website, making profit. That is a different kettle of fish entirely. So I would say that another thing that OP can do to strengthen his profile before the MBA is try and formalize that STEM tutoring as much as possible. If there's no
Hmm.
website, get a website up. If there is a website, but it's not a legal entity, make a legal entity. Like,
Hmm.
take it a level up, make it as professional and serious as possible, so that you can really allocate like a good chunk of your resume to this and make it look like a thing where you've really learned
Hmm.
something. And that way you might be able to take out some good essays from it as well. If it's seen as a big thing on your resume, you could easily justify your
Hmm.
I'm imagining like a leadership essay, for example,
Hmm.
or Kellogg's essay two, where you're
Hmm.
really focused on I believe it's a difficult decision now, difficult decision essay, where you like, oh, I was STEM tutoring and I had set up this business and I had to decide between my time doing my freelancing work and my full-time job, and here's how I managed that conflict. Like, you could build a
Hmm.
big essay out of this if you can make that extracurricular into a thing.
Agree.
Mhm.
I think that.
That's the other
Yeah.
thing I can think of. So those are three main things to strengthen the application. One, formalize your extracurriculars. Two, really focus on building a good narrative that works, whether that's healthcare or something else. And three, think about who that different LOR can be, that second LOR can be. Get those three done. You've got a couple of months before we start taking applicants for round one, or end of April, May, early May is typical. So at least a couple of months before you are really in the nitty gritty of writing the essays. Spend that time strengthening your profile in those ways.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, guys. Should we move on to our next profile for the day?
Sure.
Absolutely. Let's do it. An actuary.
All right, and actually, we've not seen one of these before. Hi, everyone. I'm currently preparing for the GRE and planning to apply for an MBA in the US for M7 and T15 schools. I'm an international candidate. He's French. Background BSc in mathematics with a GPA of 3.0 and a master's in actuarial sciences with a 3.1 GPA. 1 year at a reinsurance company in Paris. Currently working in Bermuda at a large global reinsurer as an actuary for 3 years. I work on pricing reinsurance contracts across US, European, and Asian markets. OP is URM and first gen. Post MBA goals, investment banking, in insurance, reinsurance, strategy consulting at MBB, focusing on reinsurance strategy. Uh, what do you think of this background then, John?
Ooh, twofer of background with some challenging GPAs there, Mal. But I think we'll start with the academics. I mean, math is definitely a quantity major. Would love to understand what's driving that low GPA. Also, would be good to know where the school's based and what caliber of school that is, because that also matters. Demographically, not many French applicants, URMs applying to US business schools, so definitely um, solid URM there. ECs are not specified. I actually really like the professional experience of OP. I think actuaries are so undersung and underrated. I think they are extremely, I mean, it requires a lot of, I mean, it's a very quantity role, that's for sure. And I would work hard to really play up how difficult and challenging this role is. Equivalently, I wouldn't want OP to picture, themselves as someone sitting in a dark room and calculating the odds of, one versus the other. I think this plus any kind of leadership component, whether it's inside the workplace or outside the workplace, would help round out this, professional bucket a little bit more. The goals make sense to me. I think either one works. Would be curious, Sam, to hear what your take is on that one. Um, Overall, I think, given the low GPA, the GMAT is going to have to work very, very, very hard for OP. But I do think that OP will be successful in what they want to do post MBA. Just have to show that they can handle the rigor of the business school program. Over to you, Sam.
Mm. Yeah, I think there's a couple of nuances here. So I worked at SocGen, which is like French investment bank with a bunch of like French graduates from some of the top French undergrad, the Grande École, blah blah blah. Like, there's a few factors here that I want to throw in that I think are a little bit nuanced. One, that GPA of 3.0 in mathematics from a French university where the level of math is way higher than certainly the UK and the US undergrad systems, that is not a bad GPA. Plus, I suspect, I think you'll agree that because it's in France, it's international, the US
Hmm.
programs won't have to chip in that score to the rankings. In other words, I think that OP, they're going to look at OP and say, look, smart for sure. The question mark is going to be around English.
Hmm.
Historically, French applicants struggle with the English side, the verbal side of the standardized tests. So for me, the big question mark here is that GRE verbal score. Quant is going to nail it, right? This is going to be the GRE quant side is going to feel like child's play compared to what OP's been studying in France, from studying mathematics in France. The verbal is going to be the challenge. And I think I think the overall GPA is going to have a relatively less of a factor for this applicant because it's not contributed to the rankings. It doesn't suggest he's not smart. Instead, there's going to be a refocusing on the verbal side of the GRE. One way or another, that could work in your favor. It could work against you. If you can churn out a really high or relatively high GRE verbal score, that will really, really work in your favor.
Hmm.
Conversely, if you can't, you might fall into the stereotype of like the French student that can't succeed quite as well in an English speaking environment. So that could go either way, but I think that needs to be the focus. And if I was you, that's what I would be drilling. And by the way, get in touch with a tutor. Like your profile given the importance of that part of your profile, get in touch with Mario, one of our tutors who can do the English side of the GRE, because it's going to be so important for you. Right. I think I've made that point. Um,
What could you put a number on that score? Like what? So OP does have a question about the GRE. He's asking if a strong of a 330 plus could offset the GPA.
John, do you have a view?
A 330 plus, and to build on Sam's point, it has to have at least a verbal score of 160 plus. I think that's
Mhm.
the minimum. I think 160 plus will be not easy because I obviously have seen, domestic applicants submit scores with verbal scores less than 160. And even though we know that the quant score is more important, we know that OP is very quantitatively abled. It's just now going to be assuring AdCom that he can communicate. And
Yeah.
so I think even if that GRE isn't a singing mid 330s, I think a 160 plus verbal might be okay. What do you
Well,
think, Sam?
I think that's aggressive. I agree. If you can get a 160, fantastic. I would settle for high 150s,
Okay,
158 kind of ballpark.
sure.
Let's model that. Imagine you've got let's be generous. Let's say OP maxes the quant score, right? Gets
Hmm.
a 170. A 150 would take his total to 320.
Hmm.
A 160 would take his total to 330.
Yeah.
If OP can get a 330 as a French candidate, I think that would be exceptionally strong.
Yeah.
I think 328 would also do the trick. I think 327 arguably would do the trick in that scenario as well. So
Hmm.
I'm kind of seeing
Hmm.
high 150s as a target.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah. Nice. Okay, let's talk about the career side then. John, you mentioned you quite like these goals. I have a view on this as well. I'd like to chip in. The If you can, strategy consulting with a focus on reinsurance strategy could be plausible. I don't know for sure how much reinsurance the MBBs are doing. I imagine there's a bit, but typically you go into an MBB as a generalist and you kind of lean towards a particular practice, and over time you kind of find yourself into a practice. I think OP's experience, historical experience, wouldn't count for as much going into a generalist MBB program. I think what it would count a lot for, I think an investment bank is going to value that actuarial experience a lot more, personally. The fixed income group, which is what OP is saying here, FIG means fixed income, basically means bonds, is a classic, like, very advanced modeling required in this part of a bank. They measure everything in pips, which is like a fraction of a basis point. It's very, very technical, very, very analytical. It's they would really, really value the actuarial experience, particularly if you were in as part of the insurance coverage group. So, for example, there is a team within a French investment bank whose role is to help insurance companies raise capital in the bond markets. That role has got OP's name all over it. OP, that's what I think you should be focused on.
Mm.
That's great insight, Sam.
So that's
Yeah,
sorry,
and
go on,
OP,
Matt.
yeah, I was going to get back to OP's question. OP is asking about those goals, those career goals. Do you think that's feasible, especially as an international applicant in the US market?
John, you're probably more familiar with the US job markets than I am. Do you want to start on this one?
I think if OP is able to crack into a U.S. school with a reasonable pipeline into these banks, then surely I think that's a reasonable pathway for OP. Now, if OP were to go into a European school and then go into try to crack into the U.S., that would be much harder,
Mm.
simply due to visa allowances and a couple other things. Is it still a simple path, even if you graduate from a US school? Certainly not. But I think OP has enough specialized knowledge that where you know, that petition can work in his favor.
Mm. And if not, a very plausible fallback, just to throw a scenario at you, OP, just as an
Hmm.
idea, a European MBA and then go into a European bank doing more or less the same thing would be removes all of the visa concerns. I assume
Hmm.
French, you got your French passport anywhere in Europe, even London. Now it's a bit more difficult visa wise, but much more doable.
Hmm.
London, insurance capital in an investment bank, helping the insurance companies to strategize their fundraising. That is a very good backup that could be done with a European MBA. Just to throw it out
Hmm.
there, like that's a career journey that you could maybe think about as an alternative, as a backup route. On focusing first on the US side, though, um, maybe the other option is a US investment bank, go to a US MBA, go to a US bulge bracket investment bank, and still focus on the insurance sector. It's
Mhm.
another option. I think the big thing here is that, frankly, the job market's going to look completely different when you graduate.
Hmm.
Right, OP's talking about a round one application this year. So that's Sep 26. Start the program in Sep 27, graduate in or August 29. It's going to look completely different by then. So I wouldn't use today's job market as too much of a reference point.
Mhm.
The other option, Sam, that hasn't been discussed yet is going the European path and then transferring from a European bank or a US bank in Europe into the US after a year or two demonstrating excellence in your role.
Great idea. You could
Yeah.
definitely you could whatever your MBA options are. If you end up at a European bank in Europe, you put some hard work in for 3 or 4 years. Very light or very common to transfer to the New York office, for example.
Hmm.
That's your route into the US if you really want to be in the US. That's a
Hmm.
great idea. I like that as well. Um, Anything we forgot, Mel?
Just what else do you think that OP can do to improve their profile besides the working on the narrative and the GRE?
I think the big one. Having worked with quite a lot of French applicants before, culturally, there isn't the same focus on extracurriculars as there is in the US. To get into a US undergrad program, you need volunteering hours, blah, blah, blah. It's kind of culturally part of the education journey. In France, it's not. It's very academically focused. You need great grades, and that gets you into undergrad. There will be a slight change of mindset. To apply to US business schools, you're going to need way more extracurricular experience than most French people are used to doing, particularly ones that have traveled to Bermuda, where you're in a completely new
Mhm.
environment. Like, how do you get extracurricular experience as a French person working in Bermuda? Like, it's going to be tougher. So I really
Mhm.
think the extracurricular is the one thing that OP needs to focus on going into the MBA applications to strengthen his profile or her profile.
Okay, great. That's all for OP's profile. Should we move on to our next one?
Yeah, one more thing after I've sneezed. Hang on,
Bless you.
excuse me. One other thing is that the insurance market right now is being heavily affected by the conflict in Iran. And I would
Mm-hmm.
love if OP can build a narrative around that somehow. For example, while working in Bermuda on the reinsurance industry, I was engaged on a project with a Middle Eastern shipper of gas when the XYZ terminal blew up. All right, you set the scene for a
Mhm.
super interesting story that's like, I had to rebuild all of our models with completely new assumptions in 3 days. Client was panicking. I realized that the insurance industry is very, very reliant on old assumptions that are no longer valid. My career purpose is to rebuild resilience in the insurance industry.
Yeah, love that.
Resilience requires capital, investment banking first. Maybe the longer term goal is something else that's insurance related. That could be a
Mm,
really, really nice narrative. The point I want to highlight is if you can focus on current events, it'll make insurance a lot more relevant and interesting as opposed to like kind of potentially quite abstract and theoretical to a lot of people.
makes for quite a punchy story.
Could make for a really punchy story if you play your cards right.
Yeah.
Great.
Great.
Okay. Next profile.
Next profile. Okay, 2027 intake for a South Asian male, mid-20s, grew up in the Middle East, is currently working internationally, is an international applicant. Education, top 15 US engineering school, a bachelor's in mechanical engineering with a 3.4 GPA, 5 years of work experience at matriculation, is an engineer at a Fortune 500 industrial manufacturing company, which is a leader in its space. Role progression started in product engineering, promoted within 2 years, currently in a globally focused supply chain strategy role with international exposure. 3 years in the US, 1.5 year abroad, and then back to the US. Experience highlights some quite impactful work there. Test score GMAT 695, leadership extracurriculars, a leadership role in a large US-based engineering organization, led fundraising initiatives and events, and involvement in advocacy and inclusion efforts. Post-MBA goal, transition from engineering into general management within a consumer-focused business. Long-term, build and scale a consumer platform in emerging markets with a focus on retail, distribution, and regulated categories. OP also has some early stage exposure to family business and trading operations. Target schools aiming for US MBA programs, top programs open to programs that give good money, looking for schools strong in general management, consumer retail, brand strategy, and entrepreneurship. Quite a few questions, but what do you think generally of this person's profile, John?
Cautiously solid overall. We'll start with the academics. I think a 3.5 is not ideal, but it's not out of range in a quantity school. I'm guessing T15 top engineering school, probably a UMich equivalent. Look, a 695 is okay, but for OP's goal, if OP were to apply to M7, I would probably aim for something, that starts with a 7, even for the FE, for the GMAT focus edition. Demographically, OP is South Asian, works or grew up in the Middle East. That's actually quite a fairly common path that I've seen among people who have applied to business school. So I would stay still relatively ORM. but not quite as ORM as in being based in South Asia. I like the extracurriculars. It's a nice curated buffet of things. I would like to see what kind of impact OP has had, in his leadership role at that US-based engineering organization. The goals for me make sense. I actually have no notes there. General management and consumer focused business sounds like potentially some tangent of brand management or rotational leadership program. Given OP has done rotation roles and in supply chain and strategy, that makes sense to me. Uh, Overall, I like this profile team. To really make up for that GPA, I still think the biggest gap is going to be trying to get that GMAT up and forging a solid narrative for what he wants to achieve in the future. Over to you, Sam.
I reckon OP's done with the GMAT, to be honest. I think 695, I can't blame them for wanting to stop there. That's equivalent to about a 740 on the new test. You're right. Like, I agree with you that for this particular demographic, it's not outstanding.
Hmm.
I think if you're going to apply them round one, we're now with 20th of March as we record today. I think, but probably better. I would say get started on the application. I don't see that much room for upside in the time on the GMAT. But yeah, I agree that ideally it would be a little bit higher. I think my other point is on the LORs and essays. I think there's an interesting narrative here around wanting to go back to build and scale a consumer platform in emerging markets. I like that. You've touched on that already. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think there's going to be a case to be made like, okay, so why are you going to the US? It could be basically have to make that case, right? It could be I want to go and experience best in class. Yeah, I think in your industry, John, or in the FMCG industry, John, the leaders are generally American, right? The
Hmm.
PGs of the world. It
Yeah.
is. You could argue that the US is best in class, but it's not immediately obvious why the US. Um, am I missing anything? What do you think?
Some would say that, as the population in US becomes more diverse, there is a need to cater to more global tastes and more global needs. And I think having the background and intuition forged from growing up in a different background can help this company cater to, growing minorities or a more diverse consumer set.
Okay.
That would be my investor presentation response.
Yeah, seriously. Okay, let's get to the nuts and bolts then. What's tier of schools? John, I'll let you start off. Where do you think where OP should be focusing his application in terms of schools?
Well, assuming OP is going to settle with a 695, which, makes my heart ache a little bit, I would say lower M7s to T10s is probably a good one to aim for. Um, and potentially maybe a couple T15s in there. I think again, I do like this profile. I'm just I'm just a little bit nervous that OP will be benchmarked against others with much higher stats.
Hmm, yeah, aligned. Okay. The positive then is possibly the international exposure here.
Hmm.
Um, there's US exposure. There is
Yeah.
grew up in the Middle East. Currently working internationally. I think actually, it's just an idea that's occurred to me. I think the INSEAD and LBS would love that international background
Hmm.
potentially. Might be worth
Agreed.
throwing in there as well.
Yeah.
So T10, bottom of the M7, T10, and maybe the top of the European and UK
Hmm.
industry market as well. Interesting. Okay. Um, Mal, do you have any questions that you had prepared? Any thoughts?
I think we've covered most of them, but one of OP's questions that does stand out is which schools best support a pivot into consumer and emerging markets entrepreneurship?
John, any thoughts?
I think most top schools are able to support this pivot, I think a lot of it doesn't just hinge on school, but also your prior background. And OP's background also has a good smattering of consumer experience, operational experience. So I think um, one way to think about it is, if you want a higher chance at getting in, breaking in, you got to network, right? And so if you network, you want to be in zones or regions where you are proximate to some of these companies. Uh, as an example, being, in Michigan, or somewhere in the Midwest for some of these industrial companies or consumer packaged goods companies, um, I think is a good place to start. Because I've heard time and time again, it's like, well, okay, well, I'll study at this location and I'll just fly for these networking events. Those get expensive really quickly. So it is not just whether you have the access to those places to network with. It's also whether you have the means and the time to travel.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's actually a really, really good point. I think the Chicago-based schools, Chicago-based M7, Kellogg
Hmm.
and Booth would be really kind of optimum in a way in terms of
Hmm.
balancing ranking, but also exposure to
Sure.
the CPG market. And Kellogg, clues in the name. Like it,
Sure.
it would be that would be an excellent place for OP to end up. I think there's a couple of other things. So I'm trying to get clear on this profile. What I see it right now is slightly. I can't pin down any one thing about the profile that's unique or exceptional. It's
Hmm.
it's a profile kind of from a demographic perspective that, as you say, we've seen quite a few times before. The work experience is, from what we can see here, not like exceptional. It's strong, but it's not exceptional. The stats are okay, but they're not exceptional either. I'm struggling to find what to pin on here. It feels quite bland. I think that's what I'm
Hmm.
trying to say. There's a couple of things that OP can do given this quite standard and bland profile, right? One, I think the extracurriculars are can be built up. I think
Hmm.
there is a really strong foundation here of extracurriculars. I think it's going to be important how you frame those. Frame them as something outstanding. Will be really helpful. Led fundraising initiatives, right? Give some numbers. Involvement in advocacy inclusion efforts, show some results from that. The ECs can be a strength for OP if you can make them sound interesting. Focus on the LORs and the essays as well. I think that given I get the sense that OP doesn't want to take the GMAT again. I can't blame you. Get those essays exceptionally interesting. You've got a lot of potentially interesting extracurriculars and varied international experience and varied work experience. There should be some stuff to get interesting stories from there. I can't see them right now from this roast, but there is something interesting in there. So, more than most people, you need to be spending extra time on those essays and making them interesting, I think is another factor. Then the next thing is, like I said for the last applicant, there is a logistics supply chain flavor to this narrative. A couple of
Hmm.
points here to the OP's experience. And like I said to the previous applicant, I wonder if there's a kind of current flavor that OP can put into an application. For example, using a story of logistics getting disrupted by the closure of the
Hmm.
Hormuz Strait. Maybe it's the shipping rates have skyrocketed in the last few days and weeks, and maybe OP can build a story around that. That's another thing that OP could do really to make this otherwise quite bland profile stand out.
All right. Okay, I think we've roasted OP quite a bit.
Okay.
Should we move on to our bonus discussion for today? This is a special bonus to celebrate Roast 50. We're going to tug on some heartstrings. Um, yes, an MBA is still worth it in 2026, even if it's from WGU. Now, I had to Google WGU.
I'm doing it right now. Where is it? Western Governors
It's
University.
Western Governors University.
Not one
Uh,
we often deal with, right?
Yep, not one we've seen before. Today I received a job offer of 110K for a PM role with NGC 9 months post MBA. This is a 35% increase from my previous role, and I'm absolutely elated. The best part, the MBA was paid for by my employer. yes, it's still worth it. And that's quite some hope in the RMBA thread where everybody's like, don't get an
That's
MBA. Or
pretty doom and gloom often, isn't it?
end up homeless, broke, no money, nothing. But yeah, yes, even a no-name school like WGU can help you get your foot in the interview door. I was nearly homeless as a teenager, a dad at 17, joined the military at 20 years old in 2015, and struggled with minimal raises until I went to school in 23 with WGU. If you're questioning whether you can do it or not, you can. I hope this post gives you the push you need. So now, what I'm interested in is what for you, John and Sam, what are your experiences? Like what pushed you to do an MBA? And what do you think you learned from it? What was your biggest takeaway?
John, you want to go first?
Yeah, I think like most people, I think it was built around pivoting my career. I wanted to go from shaping brands at an advertising agency to building brands from the ground up at a CPG company. CPG companies are pretty stubborn in that most of them need you to get an MBA to pivot. If not to pivot, then at least to get a leg up. And I think MBA is a perfect breeding ground for that, not just in terms of that pivot, but also a means for me to hone my leadership skills. So that's why I did my MBA. This sounds like an interview, but yes.
It's do you think so you went into your MBA thinking that's what you needed your MBA for? Looking back, do you think you did need the MBA for that pivot? Do you think your assumptions were correct?
I think they were. I think some of the skills that some of the classes that I resonated the most with me from business school weren't just the technical classes like the finance courses or the how to analyze a financial statement, P&L stuff. It's also the soft skill classes about, navigating politics at a workplace, etc.
Hmm.
What's funny was that in my MBA essay, I actually wrote specifically about my short-term goal working in brand management for a very specific CPG company, and that goal came true. That exact same company,
Wow.
and I'm glad it worked out.
Interesting. So my answer to the question, Mal, is a little bit less fairy tale than John's. My reason for doing an MBA was, like a lot of people we speak to, not actually knowing what I liked, what I wanted to do. I was a lot more open-minded, but I was also very ambitious.
Mhm.
So I had ambition plus no idea what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to do something, but I didn't know what it was. And for me, the MBA was a route to kind of channel that interest and buy a little bit of time to actually decide what it is I wanted to do. And in the end, entrepreneurship was that thing. And the other aspect to this a little bit is I was at a quite rebellious time in my career. What I mean by that was I'd been working in investment banking for 4 or whatever it was years, and I was pretty pissed off, to be honest. I'd had some atrocious managers and been through some really difficult challenges on an investment banking trading floor, which is notoriously cutthroat. And I I was in the mood of like, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't know exactly what I want to do, but I'm sure as hell not doing this anymore. And that rebellious, that anti kind of what I'd been doing was also a factor that sort of pushed me. That combined with when I interviewed at Oxford, I had an interviewer who understood the sentiment of not, I wouldn't say anger, that's a little bit strong, but the disillusionment and the frustration that I was feeling and wanting to do something with a bit more purpose and a bit more value, which is what Oxford's ethos was or is. And so there was a fit both with how I was feeling in the moment and what Oxford was looking for. And that's why I got scholarship money and blah, 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 or got the offer. But I think the big thing for me was buying a bit of time
Mm.
to blow off some steam and figure out what it was I wanted to do. Which I think is quite a common, John, we see people with that story all the time, right? How do you
Oh, of course.
not really what you should tell a school, actually, interestingly. What do you tell if a client comes to you and says, I don't actually know what I want to do? How does that conversation go for you?
Look, I mean, the reality is people apply to business school with a very specific goal and vision in mind, and ideally starts with a lovey-dovey mission. But the reality is that many of them pivot what they want to do afterwards, right? I've seen many people say I want to do impact investing or you know and then they end up working for an MBB firm, for instance. And so business school was really a chance for them to pause and reflect and just to test out, different career paths in a risk-free environment. It's also a chance to do a reset, right? If you were to take a few months off before starting your business school, nobody's going to bat an eye. If you want to take a motorcycle trip, for instance, or
Yeah.
go backpacking, or I mean, I wish I had done more soul searching for a few months before my MBA. I think if you ask me again, I would want to spend some time in Italy making pasta. That's
Making
what I wish
pasta or
I
eating
would have
pasta?
done. Oh, both, obviously both.
Yeah, I would have been there eating it. I'm not sure I would have been much good at making it. Mal, does that answer your question?
Yeah, and it's nice to see like these personal perspectives, especially when people are it's this year when people are really questioning if they should go for an MBA. And I'm sure
Mm.
as admissions consultants, we're all like, yeah, go for it. But also just to see what an MBA can do for you and the different reasons why people actually do go for an MBA. So that's nice.
Yeah,
And
I would say on that the difference, like John and I have had completely different kind of stories pushing us into an MBA. But what I would say is if you're watching this and thinking, oh, I don't know what I want to do, and I'm going to use an MBA to figure it out, don't tell the schools that.
yeah,
God's
yeah.
sake, don't tell the schools that, right?
No.
One of the things that we do with our clients is try and take those people who haven't got that much of an idea and narrow them down. It'll help them kind of narrow down their focus to make it sound like they have a little bit more of an idea than they maybe do, because schools want to see people with that North Star, with a bit of purpose.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
and so that is, yeah, I think that's the key takeaway here. The other interesting point I thought, Mal, from this post was secured this role 9 months post MBA graduation.
Yeah. He wouldn't be in
That's
the employment report, by the way. That they take only 3 months post grad.
right. So according to the WGU employment report, OP was unemployed.
Mhm.
So I mean that's quite a long time to be jobless, but congrats, OP, on getting that role finally that you're so happy with. And a PM role that sounds like it fits really well with your passion. So really hats off to you. That's awesome. And the other thing I would say, just one last thing on this, which is the best part was that my MBA was paid for by my employer. And what I would say on this is in my opinion, a lower ranked school with no debt is worth considering compared to a higher ranked school with lots of debt.
Mhm.
John, thoughts?
I think I think it depends on what your goal is, right? Because some people use the MBA to make these immediate pivots. Some people think take the MBA as a longer term play, right? Having a network, hoping that MBA will pay off in dividends, even if that MBA isn't immediately warranted to get you to your next goal, to your next goal. So the answer that I'll leave you both with this is this. It depends, which is a very MBA answer to provide. I'm so sorry.
It's your favorite.
It does, but that's fair. It does depend, right? So my
Right.
thing is, some people, especially those who don't know what it is they want to do after the MBA and are using it to buy a bit of time,
Hmm.
for those people, there's a lot of value to coming out of it
Yeah.
without debt and having that flexibility and a little bit less time pressure when you come
Hmm.
out. There is something to be said for it. Is kind of what I'm pushing for. Right.
Yeah.
On that note, thank you very, very much both for joining me. And I love that we ended on a positive touch of Reddit, which doesn't happen that often, does it? But look
No,
how
absolutely.
many upvotes it's got. It's got 300 upvotes because people are craving some good news on Reddit. It's not the doom and gloom. And
It's really just happy for this guy.
yeah, it was awesome. Look through some of the comments. Love this post. Give you an upvote. Keep grinding. Paydays coming. Fantastic work. Give an upvote as well. I love it.
Posted
Really,
this
really
challenge.
cool. Love it. So, if you've enjoyed today's roast, if you're applying for MBA programs, if you've got some questions over your profile, if you have no idea where you stand compared to all the other thousands of applicants that are out there, get in touch. You can book chats with me or John via samweeks.com to discuss what admissions consulting might look like. If you'd like your post to be roasted, send it over. You can do it via the YouTube channel. You can do it via the Reddit comments, etc. And we would love to hear from you, and we will we will endeavor to roast it in our next session. John and Mal, lovely to have you both here. Thank you so much for joining. Mal, thank you for digging out all of those nice profiles, and I'll see you both next week.
All right, see you next week. Happy Roast 50.
Happy Roast 50. Ciao.